He's the man of the hour.
Outside.
See?
All right. Good morning.
Morning.
I did. Kind of surprised me. Everyone's really excited for the cold weather, I guess. But all right. It is so very good to see each of you here. If you can, go ahead and turn to John 19. And we're going to, I believe, start in verse number 1 of John chapter 19. And so far, Jesus has gone through, he's in the process of going through the 6 different trials that make up the one big mistrial. You have the first 3 that are what you call more of the religious, ecclesiastical trials, dealing with Caiaphas and Annas and the Sanhedrin there and the cover of darkness. And now he's gone back and forth between Pilate and Herod and back to Pilate. And so now in verse 1 of John 19, it says, so then they took Jesus. So Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And, when you think about how they handle things in history, normally that was enough because Jesus has not committed, in the Roman eyes, a capital offense. And so normally what they would do is they would scourge and then they would send them on their way. Now, scourging was what? What does it mean when someone was being scourged? Whooped. Whooped, okay. Beating. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So he got whooped, he got whipped, and he got beat with a multicolored whip. As Jeff told us.
Legally, they should not have been able to do that. But I guess Pilate was afraid of causing more trouble. And they had written out.
Yes. Right. Okay, go ahead, Rick.
The way this
Roman scourge was much worse than the Jews. The Jews could give 40 stripes, they called it, but they stopped at 39. The Romans was unlimited. There was no cap on how much beating they could do. And those strips, the Romans applied little pieces of metal, glass, to the ends of those straps. So when they struck, it ripped.
Right. Get some horse.
Why would they work here? In the first place?
Well, so from the historical setting on what they do with others who are there like Jesus, normally they would scourge somebody and then they would send them on their way. They wouldn't go through with any other capital punishment. So this is where it should have stopped based on their own history. But then it went further because of pressure. So this is where it should have stopped for Jesus. Oh, sure, definitely. Yeah.
He ain't gonna try to turn around and try to profess that he was innocent, so why would they insult him like that? If he was so innocent,
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a question of that. Why would they beat him like that? Already, they said he don't have any other than people saying that he's at fault.
Mm-hmm.
They judge it right there, and they tell the people, we don't see no fault in it.
Yeah. I mean, that's just how it'll play it out. So there's another incident. I know I mentioned this one maybe 3 weeks ago, where there was another man who came in, a lot of very similar stuff that Christ is going in for. This other man came in, and his name was Bar Jesus. I think it was Judas Bar Jesus, but anyway. And he came in, and his whole thing was that he said that he's going to destroy the temple. He put himself as a false Messiah. He tried to kind of create a following himself. And so a lot of similarities there between Jesus. And this was about AD 63, I think it was. And what they did with that man, and that's just 30 years later. So different people, because Pilate was gone in AD 36. So different people. But what they did with him was they scourged him, humiliated him publicly, and then they sent him on his way. And so that's probably most documented, and that was from a historian called Josephus that has that inside of his writings. And then there's another incident of another man, very similar. He was creating riots. He's not doing revolutionary acts. He's just making riots, trying to get, I want to say, trying to kind of get more food and stuff. And they scourged him, and then they left him. And so I feel like from a historical setting, they should have just simply scourged Jesus and left him with the offenses he committed. But they didn't. And I think this part right here, verses 1, 2, and 3, all dealing with just the humiliation of him. And I believe from a historical standpoint, they should have left him. But right here, we know that's the story is that they're not. But here's the interesting thing about this whole situation. Who really, and we're going to get into this, hopefully this class today, who really had the power, though, to put Jesus on the cross? Pilate? Okay. Yeah. See, Jesus did. Yeah. John 10, and even though Jesus is the one that's being humiliated and being scourged and beat, he's the one that says, I lay down my life. No one has the power to do it. And he'll actually call that to Paul's attention later on. He'll say, God gave you this authority to do this. He's kind of calling him out. But we'll get there in a minute. That's verse 11. But, all right. So, verse 19, verse 1, I think we've already pretty well established that the scourging going on there. And, it was the formal sentence that was passed, preliminary scourging, more serious than a maximum 39 lashes allowed. Now, an interesting thing in there about this scourging is Jesus predicted in Matthew 20, verse 19, and Luke 18, verse 33, that he was going to be scourged already. He already knew it was going to happen to him. And so this wasn't any kind of a surprise even to Jesus. And then verses 2 and 3 say, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put on his head, and they put on him a purple robe, and then they said, Hail, King of the Jews, and they struck him with their hands. Verse 4, Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Okay, so, again, right here, Pilate is saying, I find no fault in the man. He is innocent, and that should have been the end of it. Okay? And it's interesting here that when you look at this crown of thorns and the purple robe around him and being mocked, really called Hail, King of the Jews, and they struck him with their hands, is, that's how these people are treating God. It's really interesting there that some people, and you see this throughout the history of Scripture, would sink so low that whenever they would see God's man, that would only be a prophet, they would imprison them. They would put them in stocks like they do with Jeremiah. They would banish them. They would try to banish them anyways. They would do all kinds of things. Hebrews 11 goes into that a little bit more in detail there in the last part of Hebrews 11. But, it's interesting here. And what made them treat Jesus like this? Obviously they believe at this point in time that their God was a pagan. That these are pagan people hitting the face of the divine man. These are barbarians hitting the face, twisting the crown of thorns, putting a robe around him, mocking him in a barbaric fashion to one that gave order to the universe.
But they didn't believe that.
Not yet they didn't. But it's interesting when you look at it, is that these individuals, and in fact, the whole idea of a Caesar being deified would come a little bit earlier. So I think right now Caesars were deified. And so if that be the case, then they did not, because of that, view Jesus as deity himself. And even if they did, the only deity that was a king was their king, and that was Caesar. And so it's interesting here that they are blaspheming against Jesus, and by doing so, they're going against God himself. But and what's interesting here is that when the universe was created and man was made in the very image of God, according to Genesis 1:26. And man was given dominion over everything else in the garden. Man was the one that was given the authority from God to look after and be a steward of the Garden of Eden, and now ultimately the earth, with the promise there in Genesis 3, and the rest of the earth. And yet right here, Jesus is, by who he is going to constantly be redeeming man. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 49, he's called the second Adam, the one that's going to come out, and he's going to not come from the earth, but come from heaven itself to, redeem man's image in God's eyes. And this is who man is, and this is Jesus. And therefore, he's the perfect example to us as a man, and he is also, of course, God incarnate. That's the Gospel of John is really trying to impress that upon our souls. And yet right here, they are going in their paganistic mentality to destroy the image of God, of Jehovah. And an interesting thing there is that they were not allowed to touch any of their pagan idols. They couldn't do that. That was seen as a capital offense. And yet, when you think about who Jesus is, and how he is here to elaborate to them, Hebrews 1:1-2, he is the very express image, the exact representation of God. They should not have been allowed to do anything. He's not, I'll say, an idol like how they view it, and nor is Christ's idol how he has ever been viewed. But it's interesting to look at how Christ is coming down and how he is here, showing us, elaborating for us God, and they really went after him. After a man who was God incarnate. But they didn't know that. But it's interesting there that you kind of, you can kind of go that a little bit further. But I thought that was just an interesting little side note that about Christ there. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Is there a distinction between, they say they struck him with their hands? Is that a slap like this, or was it just like beating him like you see on television? Beat up somebody really bad?
Yes. Yeah. 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 It's more of a, turn in this direction, let's hit you type thing. Yeah. Yeah. It's not just a slap on the hand. It would have been a full force. That's according to the word struck. Yeah. And depending on who you look at for that word, it's obviously seen as being a a striking with the intent on injury, not death. So they're not going to beat him until he's dead, because that's, not why they're doing that. But they want to get the point across for sure. Okay.
Well, that's what, why would, make the decision that he had authority and control? Because, he denied that Jesus was even guilty. And in verse 7, they go come back and say, we have the law. And by that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. You see, that's just what you were saying about how they denied God. Okay, Pilate had authority to convict them of the accusation that they made against him. But he didn't see anything wrong. He didn't see any wrong found in Jesus for questioning him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pilate even was to try to plead with them to the fact that, hey, you don't really have a case for the authority that's above you right now, since you're in Roman authority. So you do it. You do it. He told them to get him, y'all crucify him.
Right.
And they the ones in authority to do that.
Right. Right. Right.
So that's a good question to ask them. Why would the people in authority tell you he's not guilty, you still want to push the fact that he is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he said he's the Son of God?
To me, okay, so to me, what I think the parallel problems. So obviously the Jews, excuse me, their whole thing that they're trying to get on Christ is he's saying he's Son of God, number one, and number two is he has claimed he's going to destroy the temple. And so those two things are going to follow Jesus throughout the rest of his life. Those two things, that he's Son of God, making himself equal with God in their mind, which was wrong and unlawful for man to do so. Yet Christ didn't just claim it; he was. He didn't claim it. He was already that person before he, even came to the earth. But they didn't obviously understand that. And then because of the temple, talk, which Christ, mentioned something about his body, not about the literal temple, but they view that as he's going to destroy our temple, and that was seen as a very big offense inside of Jewish law. The other side of it is the Romans only, I think, really looked at it from the standpoint of this man as claiming to be the Son of God, which is only a title in their culture reserved for Caesar. So in that standpoint, they, I think, view Jesus as someone who's trying to make himself equal with Caesar. But the Romans are saying we can't prove any of that. We didn't find no fault in the man. And the Jews couldn't either, really. They were, and that's why they had false witnesses come up and say stuff, because they could prove either. Yeah. Yeah, well, and the thorns.
The king of the Jews.
Yeah. I'm going to get you. That I can't remember the name of it. I'm struggling with names. Anyway, the Romans would have normally it was metal engraving, of the leaves, olive leaves, or whatever, showing kingship. Only royalty could wear that. And so instead of, I think it was olive leaves. So instead of having the olive leaves that were metal around the head of a Caesar, they did thorns. And that was just a whole mockery of him entirely. Our king really does wear this stationary metal sign of peace and harmony. That's the olive branch. And we're going to give this man thorns, So, and that whole thing was seen as an absolute mockery on the reverse side toward Jesus there from the Caesars. Go ahead, Crystal.
I think it really just based on control and money at the end of the day. You wouldn't have any more control or any money because you have so many believers that started following Jesus because of the miracles that he was doing.
Mhm.
And then they didn't have a way to explain why is this man able, you guys are supposed to be the ones that are so close to God, we're supposed to be coming to the temple and we're giving money, we're doing all these things, and how did this man come and he's doing all these miraculous things? So I think when it really boils down to it, it has to do with control, it has to do with money. And the Romans were the Romans. The Romans had the biggest army there was, and they were aggressive, and it's like giving lions food to play with.
Yeah.
I don't think that they really see it as, okay, he's going up against Caesar because he's saying that he's a god or a child of God. I don't really think that they were even thinking in that aspect because they were so inferior that it was just, I don't think they seen it as that. They just seen it as, we like war, we like to play with our food, and that's what we're gonna do,
Yeah.
I don't think it was really a team or a time where, and that's just my opinion, where they were actually seeing it as, oh, we don't want to go, or they were, I think that they just looked at it as this is a man, the political aspect of it. They want to still harm him because, he's taking their followers and, whatnot, and
Right.
that's just how it went.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I do want to change what I said. They only heard of him as king of the Jews. I said son of God, but they heard of him as king of the Jews. And so that was a big problem for them. So I do want to change that. Hey, go ahead.
I was just curious, I know, was Jesus at this time considered a Roman citizen?
No.
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 Paul used the Roman card when he was in prison and stuff that they couldn't.
Yeah. 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 There's speculation there about Paul, but how he got it, we don't know. Part of it's that Tarsus was a province of Rome, and a province doesn't have the same legal standing as a actual, being born in Rome or Italy or whatever. So the province, my understanding, I could be wrong, it's been a while since I looked into this, you had to purchase your citizenship. You weren't born into it. And so I think perhaps his parents probably purchased it, and he was born under that. That's I think the kind of the common thing because of him being born in Tarsus. But that's speculation. We don't know that for a fact. Because it's a province, not like Philippi. If you're born in Philippi, you got citizenship because it's seen as an extension of Rome. But a province is the same kind of like a satellite type thing. Yeah. But anyway, okay, go ahead.
It's amazing how they didn't know these people. I'm thinking about Acts 19, where the blind man, even recognized and said, Jesus I know, Paul I know, so who are you? But this is a whole crowd that doesn't recognize who's been who.
Right. And, and it is very interesting, especially like when we see all of the thousands that Jesus, fed, that would have heard about him. I mean, whole regions were hearing about Jesus, and now thinking of like Samaria and John 4. I mean, whole areas are seeing who he really is, and yet they've missed it.
Like it's predestined.
Yeah. Do you have something, Rick? Do you have anything? Sorry, didn't mean to spook you there. Oh, you had your hand up. Okay. Did I miss anybody? I thought somebody else had their hand up. Maybe I didn't. Okay, maybe I didn't. Okay. All right, so they struck him. They cursed him. They said, "Behold your king, hail, King of the Jews." And they struck him with their hands. Pilate said, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no fault in him." And that little part right there to me is also interesting because normally what they would do is they would not present him again. They would keep him under there for further investigation. Because with the offense, he should have stayed there for at least 24 hours minimum, because they were not allowed to pass a capital punishment judgment upon anybody in 24 hours, no matter if they were found guilty or not. And so he should have kept him. But I find it interesting here that he decided to bring him back out and show him, I find no fault in him. So that's just neither here nor there, but that's just interesting to me. Okay, I think Pilate's trying to get Jesus out of it, but he's just not that kind of a person, you know. He's just not, and then we go and see how Pilate is seen as being the ultimate. You know, if you were to get in your dictionary and look up the word wishy-washy, you might see Pilate. I don't know if it's even in the dictionary at all, but but if you see that, you might see Pilate's picture in there for being wishy-washy, So I think he's showing signs of his wishy-washiness here. Go ahead.
No, I think in his mind, he had good reason. It was from reason that he finally sent Jesus to the cross. And the reasoning is, if he had set Jesus free, he was going to have a rebellion on his hands. And Rome did not like for their territories or provinces or whatever to have any conflict in it. That's why they put their people in there, to keep no insurrection, no protesting. It's just against Rome is not allowed.
Sure.
So he acquiesced. Did he have the power to let this go? Well, absolutely, he had the power.
Yeah. And there is other conflict going on at this point in time in the empire. It wasn't just all in Palestine. You have Pontus. That was had some major conflict there. You had Egypt was giving them a lot of grief. I mean, there's other regions giving them a lot of grief. But it's interesting here is that Jesus, the whole problem that people had with Jesus. Now we know about the envy. We know about John 2 dealing with Jesus and the money changers there and making house merchandise out of the temple. And I think that's in with Annas. I think Annas had it on the cards as soon as that all happened. And back in John 2, I have this guy's number. He's trying to tear up my financial, and I think you mentioned in that, Crystal, a little bit. He's messing up my financial means in the temple. When he threw out the money changers, I think he started to kind of figure out ways to get Christ. And what was surprising, if he was kind of behind the scenes more than what we know about. But it comes down to is that Jesus was meant to die. He was planning on it. And the world, though, really crucified him, because in John 7, verse 17, it says that he said, he exposed their works, that they are evil. And so that's what the problem was. Christ was seen as a whistleblower. And, and I know when people were growing up, and when you were growing up and you know that you did something wrong and you had that friend with you along the way and you said, keep this thing real quiet. And then your friend goes and tells on you and you said, I thought we were friends. Know that? It's interesting here that Jesus is merely saying what you're doing. The world is sinful. The world is evil. The world is wrong. And they're going to try to kill him. And so, and this whole thing is just proving this more and more and more. And it's interesting here that in the cover of darkness, they're going to try and they're going to eventually succeed in putting out the light of the world. And so, they knew that they couldn't do it in the light. They had to do it in the darkness. That's where that's always been associated with evil and sinfulness and blindness. There's darkness. So right now, they're still in the early hours of the morning, but it's still dark outside, I'm pretty sure. And then Jesus came out in verse 5, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, behold the man. Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out and saying, and the word saying there is the repetitive chanting saying, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, you take him and you crucify him, for I find no fault in him. And then the Jews answered, we have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the praetorium, and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave no answer. Now we'll stop in verse 9 really briefly. When you look at all of this, of course, what are they claiming? That Jesus is a blasphemer. That's the whole allegation. He's a blasphemer. Okay? And according to Leviticus 24, verse 16, anyone who blasphemes the name of the Lord must be put to death. And the entire assembly, though, was allowed a stoning. And that's how their law allowed him to die, was by stoning. But he's going to go to death on a Roman cross. And so, to me, right here, you see further incident of wishy-washiness. Because he told the Jews, you take him. That's stoning. But he's going to end up on a cross. So, you see, and that's all how it meant to be. And it's interesting then that Pilate would write that inscription above his cross that had what on it, remember? Yeah, King of the Jews. And it was written in 3 languages, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. It's interesting that even in the furthering of the humiliation of Jesus, he's still going to, in a roundabout way, show that he is still king over every nation and every tongue is going to see who this man really is. And in Philippians 2, verse number 9, it says, and every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess that he is God. And so Pilate, I think, actually just kind of played into God's hands even further, even with that. But that's coming up later. But the whole thing is Hail, King of the Jews, in the sense of absolute mockery. Trying to make a sham out of Jesus, out of the Savior.
Basically, it all boils down to this was foretold in the prophets.
Yes.
All these things. And so they had to, you know, they had to have this way.
Yes, it did. And excuse me. And him being and Christ not giving an answer is further prophetic from Isaiah 53, where it says, "Here is a lamb who was silent before his shears." And let me see. This one is another section. Let me look at it. No fault, no answer. I gotta look at my notes, but anyway, there's one verse, it might be in Matthew. I gotta look it up, where it uses the double emphatic for kind of like no, nothing, which means in the same case right here, or I think it's written out like no, not a thing. I think it's how it says that he responded. He said like no, not a thing, and with the little phrase no answer, that is seen as a very emphatic no answer. That's seen as Jesus is going to be, you can envision this, looking in the eyes of Pilate, he's going to remain very quiet. And, you know, I kind of think of it that, you know, when you done something wrong and somebody gave you the eye, and they didn't say a word to you, and then you start thinking, you know, what is happening here? What have I done? To me, that's what you're thinking about when it's saying right here, Jesus gave no answer. He's looking. You can see him looking at Pilate, and Pilate's gonna look at that and still keep on moving things on. But that had happened that way, and so I think that was all prophetic too. He had it. That's how it had to happen. Go ahead, of course.
Pilate had to start in the way, and he's back and forth with the Jews. Right after they accused him, the soldiers looked at him and put the crown on his head and the robe on. They took him back out with the crown on his head and the robe on. And then Pilate take the accusation again, where he tells them, you have a law, you know, that you can use to do what you asking me to do. So you do it yourself. And now he goes back after they claim he's the Son of God and say, why did he get afraid when he had, and then he go question Jesus again in the palace. He takes him back in the palace and ask him about this. And Jesus don't give him an answer.
Right.
Okay. That's something, to me, that's because he's back and forth with this, but he's the one that's in charge to do all this. And then he's trying to give the Jews the leeway to do that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same token, they're there where he's at, that's where they crucify him at anyway. So,
Yeah.
and that's why they're going to crucify him anyway.
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
I was surprised had some apprehension even with the authority he had because he couldn't pass the judgment.
Right.
So they were saying to condemn Jesus.
Right. Right. I'm going to read this last little thing, and then we're going to stop on verse 9. About he gave him no answer. Pilate responds to Jesus' silence with hostility. Verse 10, Roman law did not interpret silence as a confession of guilt, but failure to respond to charges could leave a case one-sided and hasten conviction. If a defendant failed to offer a defense, the judge would normally ask about the charge 3 times before the defendant would be convicted by default. Neither legal custom is at issue here, as noted above. Pilate is not bound by his law in this way, and can act at his own discretion. So he's allowed to, carry out his own judgment here. But I found that interesting here, that he has to go. And how many times does he ask Jesus? 3 times. And each time it comes back, I find no fault in the man. But then it came into default because Christ never. Yeah. So, okay, we're going to stop there in verse number 9. So thank you for being in class today. We're going to have worship here in about 15 minutes. We're right on time. And thank you for being here.